It's something like Nyanchen Tanglha, but I can't say it. I'm English.
Really impressive North Buttress on a very rarely climbed 7,000 metre peak. And it's in the Nyanchen Tanglha range, which is separate to the Himalaya.
We're in a very, very wet Pembroke, Boshiston, where we hopefully should be rock climbing, but we'll probably be better swimming. No fixed abode for 14 years, and I've been sort of ducking and diving around from my vans to climbers club huts and friend's house. I do a good cat sitting houses around North Wales, but a lot of the time I sort of sleep in my van and in Betty, so in my new van, which is very, very big. And before that I was a PE instructor in the prison service. I did that for 15 years till I was 37 years old. And I paid my mortgage off and then I just went climbing full time.
Now I'm a family man with children and a wife. You know, we need to pay the bills. That's more easy to do with a professional job. At work I'm called an occupational hygienist, and that is really somebody who evaluates workplace exposure to usually hazardous chemicals. So in the workplace people might handle chemicals that cause cancer or asthma or long-term illnesses, toxic chemicals, and it's my job to evaluate the exposure, and if exposures are too high I advise on improvements that could be made to things like ventilation, etc. But it's very different from being somebody who works in the mountains or being a mountain guide. It's important that my mountains are separate from the rest of my life. You know, I go there as an escape. It's a hobby. You know, it's a recreational activity. I think if I lived in the mountains and climbed every day as a guide, I wouldn't have the same motivation. And also, in some ways, the mountains would be less special. The mountains are a very special place, and it's somewhere I go to escape from life and for the simplicity. You know, I'm not really interested in taking clients to the mountains or anything like that. It's a place for me to go. For a country that kind of invented in mountaineering as an activity in the Alps and has done so well in the Himalayas, the fact we don't have any mountains is very peculiar, really, isn't it?
But maybe the fact that we don't have that many mountains has led us to want to protect them more. Fair to say we regard Stanage here as, you know, is very much a sort of national asset, an asset for us and for future generations.
Religious status for climbers, doesn't it?
Yeah, God's own rock.
Yeah, God's own rock.
And we do want to protect it. And, you know, we would not want to see people chipping holes or hammering pegs into it or damaging it in any way.
And I think because we protect our own climbing, it means that when we go to other places we have the same kind of ethic, doesn't it? We want to treat it with due respect and not damage it in any way. English style. English style. English style, the only way.
The strong tradition of leaving it as you found it.
You don't really feel like you've got the right to damage something the next generation can use. So when you go to the Himalaya, it's the same kind of ethic, you know. If the mountain's too hard, you don't bolt it and fix ropes, you just leave it and somebody else will climb it later on. You know, you don't have a right to bring the mountain to your level. You know, you either raise your game or do something else. I mean, I personally don't have any desire to be a professional climber. I've got family and business commitments, but we're very fortunate in Britain is we actually have a strong system of sponsorship that's not kind of commercial driven. It's just driven by organisations that give out grants to climbers to go to interesting places. So we have the Mount Everest Foundation, we have the British Mountaineering Council, we have the Alpine Club's Alpine Climbing Fund, and there's more actually. So it means that if you're a sort of young or an older experienced climber and you want to go to the Himalayas, you can actually get quite good funding for it.
I don't have any kind of fixed routine or pattern. I just see what comes up and then I either go and do it or I don't really. Wales for me is home, North Wales is home. I was in the prison service, so I basically just shut up, banged people up and was a prison officer for about 4.5 years. But after 2.5 years of that, I decided I was didn't want to do anymore. because it's a really difficult job. But then I discovered the gymnasium, and you could be a PE instructor within the prison service. And so I trained and trained to be fit enough and qualified to get on the PE training course. And once I got on the course, I went to North Wales for a part of the course and discovered climbing. And I was about 28 years old then. I think I climb more now for quality things and really like memorable things, and just to try and save my body a little bit, because I'm getting a bit old now. I'm not a professional climber. I'm not good enough to be a professional climber. I'm a climbing bum. I'm just somebody who's passionate about climbing, I think. And to earn money through taking people into the mountains, that's not really what I'm about. Just want to go climbing for myself.
My family were not climbers, but I had an uncle who was a climber, my Uncle Peter. So this is my first ice axe. I got this when I was about 12 from my Uncle Peter. And it has got an amazing story behind it. He was a dog sledder in Antarctica, and he was going across the sea ice in Antarctica when a nuclear submarine coning tower came out of the ice, broke the ice up, and scared his dogs. And all the crew of the nuclear submarine climbed out and they walked around on the ice. And then after about an hour, the submarine went back down again, and the ice kind of returned, and they left behind an ice axe. And this is it. It actually says US Navy on the pick. I learnt from a very early age that mountains were dangerous places. My first climbing partner, Roger Sutcliffe, he was the one that really introduced me to ice climbing and rock climbing. He was a really good climbing partner, but he died when I was 15. I realised that, climbing was a dangerous activity. There was a consequence to it all. He was carrying this ice axe when he died. And I inherited it. I kind of look at this ice axe before every expedition, and it has a very important message to me. Don't mess up. Don't let your guard down. You can die very, very easily in the mountains. They're wonderful places, but it's a serious place. If you want to climb new routes in the Greater Ranges, then research is a hugely important thing. Well, first of all, it's very enjoyable, but you're not going to find out about these mountains on unclimbed faces, just by sitting around. You need to actually actively get out and research. And just by getting a journal, sitting down with it, and what I do is I spend hours reading them and looking at the pictures, because there'll be a record of a really interesting climb, but in the background, on one of the photos, there might be something in the background. An interesting peak, an interesting face. And so many ideas come from looking at journals, and then that's when the internet becomes really useful. Where on Google Earth you could actually get a really good idea of where the peak is, what the faces look like, what the approach is like, what the descent is like. It's cheating really, to be honest, but I've become a huge fan of Google Earth. I spend hours, if not days, wasted on Google Earth, because you can cruise the Himalayas looking for objectives. The last trip I was on was to Tibet, and that all came about because of a Japanese alpine news. There was just a picture in it, a random picture taken by a Japanese climber explorer, Tamatsu Nakamura, and I contacted him and he sent me some more pictures, and it was a picture of a mountain from a very unusual angle. It showed there was a big face there that nobody had really noticed before. Strangely, I'd driven past this peak about 8 years earlier on the south side. Didn't look very interesting as a climbing place, so I'd been within a few miles of this mountain already and never even noticed it. But Tom had taken a picture from the north and it showed this really sort of dramatic peak, and that's what started our expedition. Next thing I did, I had to get a climbing partner, because I've been climbing with Mick Fowler for many years, but he's not really interested in climbing 7,000 metre peaks anymore. So I had to get myself a new climbing partner. That's where Nick Bullock stepped in. Not really climbed together before, but we've known each other for a long time, and he's very well known on the British climbing circuit.
Day 4 or day 5 in Tibet. It's quite an interesting place. Like the important things in life, like coffee and bread, they don't really seem to exist. Look, tripe mixed in with the bread. What's that all about?
Previous climbers have been on the south side.
This is not so.
So we've got the main Himalayan range here, and the Nyanchen Tanglha range is this small subgroup over here. And one of the things to note about it is you can see the Nyanchen Tanglha West Range, and it's next door to a large lake, and that's actually the largest lake in Tibet. It's almost like an inland ocean. We were soon to discover that completely changed the climate around the mountains. It created almost a coastal microclimate that was very damp and very different from the climbing conditions in the main Himalaya. But also we've got a strong sort of tradition of exploration in Britain, a culture of exploration, which I think goes back to sort of the British Empire, of people going off to Africa and India looking for new territory. Well, I think we're definitely the first Westerners in this valley.
Right.
Some yak herders, but no climbers ever.
No. Your pitch is pretty steep though, Paul.
Well, I reckon that's your pitch actually. And we have the north face of Nyanchen Tanglha southeast. Straightforward in a really mega atmospheric setting.
Straightforward, eh? Your lungs coming out of your mouth, walls surrounding you.
Yeah. The interesting thing is the clag has come down and the bottom half of the route looks very sort of Dwat's Eiger-like.
Yeah.
But you realise that's only the bottom half. There's another half, you know, pretty impressive sat on top of that. So I've always climbed 6,000 metre peaks, and last year one that was just 7,000 metre because you can fit that into a shorter holiday period. Traditionally I've allowed myself a 4-week holiday in the mountains.
I don't climb with people who I don't know. It isn't just the physical act of climbing, it's about who I'm with, and it's about getting on with who I'm with and having a good experience with the person I'm with. Bloody Paul Ramsden, isn't he? So there was no problem about going climbing with Paul. He's a pretty laid back guy. I knew we'd get on.
The Ramsden 5-star palatial bivvy.
It's brilliant.
Look at it. He's hating it. Don't believe a word he's saying. He's hating it.
So we're at Camp 2. It's been 2 really tough physical days. Today we did the head wall on the lower buttress, which was a massive question mark, and it went.
But now we've got through the head wall.
You don't want to go down.
And now it's like exciting and serious, isn't it? Because there's only one way I want to go, really.
You took the piss out of me for saying we're not going down, and now we've done the crux. You're sat there going, "I'm not going down. I'm not going down."
But I know, but we've done like what we think is the crux of the whole mountain, and it's like it's there for the taking, isn't it?
I just spend a lot of time on the internet finding the lightest thing, you know. Saving weight on pitons and cabin devices and ropes, it means A, I can travel lighter, but also it means I can carry more food. The lighter the equipment, the more food you can carry. The more food you can carry, the longer you can stay on the mountain, the longer you can survive bad weather to give you more chance to get to the summit.
Paul's come good tonight with this sort of snow thing to get a ledge.
So this is the hammock. Weighs virtually nothing, and it's been reinforced with Kevlar tape. So the whole thing is really strong. You could easily sleep in it. 2 people could easily sleep in it. This is the most extreme location I've ever used one. I feel a bit perched here, but I'm sure Nick will feel even more perched on the outside.
On the bloody outside.
Yeah.
The thing that probably gets you through most expeditions is just being like hitting your head against the wall, being able to hit your head against the wall repeatedly and then just pick yourself up and keep going. And just being stubborn is probably a good training for a good personality for an expedition. I think out of the 23 3 expeditions to the Greater Ranges I've done, I think. You can probably count them on one hand, the ones that I would class as being really successful, or you just have to be stubborn and...
Well, listen to that. We have, like, apart from the first day, we've had crap weather really, haven't we, every day?
Yeah.
It's just like, when you're flogging kind of like knee-deep post holing up to 6,700 metres, which is what we're at now, it's like, oh God. And then the weather's doing this, and then...
Yeah, so hi folks, we've completed our route, which is the North Buttress. Took about 4.5 days and it was hard work.
North Buttress, is that what we're calling it now?
I suppose we might call it North Buttress. So it's day 6 today. We descended the East Ridge until visibility just about 0. We dug in.
You found a few little holes, didn't you, in the 0 visibility?
Yeah, good bugs.
So we decided to think it was time to stop. Who thought the adventure would start now? We're kind of in a situation and we need to get out of it, don't we? At some point. We've kind of nearly run out of food, so...
Well, that's it. People talk about expeditions all the time, but we've always said we go on holiday, don't we? You know, it's a holiday and you want to have a good time and you don't take it seriously at all. And the humour continues and gets worse as the conditions get worse, don't they?
We're actually in the wrong valley at the moment, aren't we?
Yeah, we're in the wrong valley at the moment.
There's not many people my age still climbing mountains. Usually people go on 1 or 2 expeditions and then decide it's too hazardous to do. But I try really, really hard to make it as safe as possible. With my equipment, with my planning, with my choice of routes, looking for safe lines, for planning the descent. And I think if you do that, you can keep mountaineering for a long time.
Hereby let it be known, I'm not making this film for anybody else, apart from me. To remind myself, never, ever, 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 ever do this again. Ever. 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 That's it.
That'll do. That's a good one to finish on, but then now Paul's already sending me pictures again and I've already said I'll go again, so bloody Ramsden's fault. Bastard.